All right, let's begin. So welcome and thank you for connecting today. We are coming to you live with a webinar presentation from Conservation International. And today we're going to be talking about TEAM, the Tropical Ecology Assessment and Monitoring Network. Very exciting program here at CI. My name is Michael Wagaman. I have the very fulfilling role here at Conservation International because I get to work with all of you, our generous donors and partners in the effort to protect nature. As members of CI's Emerald Circle of Donors, I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us here. Your support is felt around the world. We really can't do this without you, so thank you again. This is the second presentation in a new series of webinars for our donors. I'm very excited to share today's speaker with you, and I'll be introducing Jorge in just a moment. Our first presentation in the series was given by Dr. Daniela Rake, Conservation International's Senior Vice President of the Moore Center for Science. Daniela presented a fantastic overview of our science program and how we use that information to inform our conservation initiatives. Daniela's presentation was recorded, and I'll be sharing a link in the chat in just a moment, so later on you can watch it in case you missed when we broadcast that just a few months ago. Just a few final reminders before we get started. The audio for the presentation is through your computer or through the device that you're using to connect, so you can adjust the volume through your device as needed. And we'll be using the built-in chat feature today. So you should see a box on the right side of your screen that says chat. I'll be sharing a few links as we go along, and we can answer your questions. So we'll save time at the end of the presentation to address your questions. And if for any reason we aren't able to answer all the questions or don't get to your question, we will certainly follow up with you and make sure that you get your response. But again, chat us throughout the presentation with questions or comments, and we'll be happy to address. And finally, we do record these presentations, and we'll be sending out a link shortly after the recording so you can watch it, or in case you need to log off for any reason during the presentation, you won't miss anything. We'll make sure that you see the recording. Okay, now I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for today. Jorge Ahumada is the Executive Director of the TEAM Network and has been with the program since 2006. Jorge has extensive experience in using data to study ecology. He holds a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Princeton University and was recently named a professor of practice at Arizona State University along with 6 other CI scientists in a special partnership that we have with ASU. Today, Jorge is going to be introducing you to TEAM and give some updates about their extraordinary work. So now I'm happy to pass it over to my colleague, Jorge Ahumada.
Thank you for the introduction, Michael, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to talk about some really cool stuff that we're doing here at Conservation International. But before I go into that, let me tell you a little story. So this story is about me. And I was born in Bogota, Colombia, a big city. Most of my life, neither one of my parents was a nature kind of person. We didn't go hiking or boating or fishing or anything like that. The most interesting thing that I saw of nature as a kid was going to a park. So you can see Bogota is a pretty heavily populated area. Most of my childhood was spent doing that. And for some reason, and I still don't understand why, I decided to study biology. And when I was an undergraduate student in Bogota, they took us to a field course in this place. It's called Macuira. It's at the northern tip of Colombia, on the Guajira Peninsula, on the northeast of Colombia. And most of that area is desert. You can see some of the sand and dunes there. But within this desert, there's a really cool island of forests. And that's where we went to do our fieldwork. It was an introductory fieldwork course. And that was my first exposure to real nature. really. I'd never been outside of parks and places like that. So I got to see, when I walked into this forest for the first time, I remember having this almost mystical experience that I walked into this temple, incredible temple of trees, of incredible cacophony of sounds of birds and frogs and insects buzzing around, and all these smells coming from different plants and water and air. Everything was new to me. It was an incredible experience. I'm having shivers as I talk about it right now because I'm remembering. But that was like a very important experience for me as a young biologist. And I told my father when I started studying biology that I wanted to study marine biology. But as soon as I walked into this place, I was like, I don't want to study marine biology. I want to be a tropical ecologist. So I spent a lot of time there. Later in my career, I went to the Amazon basin and started working with monkeys, spider monkeys. And if any of you had done any field work at all, you would know that you have to walk a lot in order to see monkeys, especially when they're wild monkeys. So I walked a lot, and one day I run into a jaguar. And this picture is not of that time, but anytime, this picture comes from our team network, which I will talk about in a second, but it reminds me of the same encounter that I had with that jaguar. And when I saw this jaguar, it was just like, right like this, it was coming at me, it looked at me in the eyes, and it stopped. And it was probably about 4 or 5 feet from me, so fairly close. These animals are big. And I took out my machete. Everybody who's doing field work has a machete because you never know. And this animal was like looking at me quietly, and nothing happened. And with the big eyes, if you have cats and you see your cat look at you, now think about a cat 10 times bigger looking at you. So this is the experience that I was having, and almost mystical. I mean, I was getting very, very anxious because of like this cat staring at me. But I took out my machete just in case, and then he suddenly lost interest, looked into the forest, and just kind of jumped out and disappeared, making absolutely no noise. This is an animal that weighs 100 pounds, no noise whatsoever. It's amazing. Now I spent a lot of time working in the forest, probably a good 3 years, and I never saw a cat. Only this time. I only saw it once. Now with team, we see thousands and thousands of images of cats every single month. I mean, this is the number of total images of jaguars that we've seen in team since it started. It's amazing. I mean, before, we could not really get any insights on what is in the forest, especially these large animals. And now with the power of technology, we can, and through a global network like this, we can get a lot of pictures. So these are just for Latin America. We sampled many, many other species. And I think this is just amazing. If I had access to a camera trap back in the day, I would have done amazing things. I feel pretty lucky that I'm managing the largest camera trap network in the world now. But it doesn't cease to amaze me that it was very difficult when I was starting, and now it has changed. So let me tell you a little bit about TEAM. So TEAM stands for Tropical Ecology Assessment and Monitoring Network. There'll be a quiz at the end of the presentation, so make sure you write that down. But TEAM is essentially a network of tropical forest sites. We usually work in protected areas around the world, and we're focused on tropical forests because they comprise about 50% of the forest area in the world, and they have 10%, and they have about 50% or more of the biodiversity. And the problem with tropical forests is that despite all this, we have very, very little information about what's happening in tropical forests. We can see tropical forests from satellites from above, but we can't see them inside, can't see anything inside. So this network was created to fill that gap in the knowledge of tropical forests. And particularly we focus on wildlife, tropical trees, climate, and some other variables that we collect in a standardized way throughout this network. Basically, our theory of change, or let's call it our modus operandi, is that we collect data at a team site, typically a protected area. as much as possible, we use technology and standardized sensors because we want to have the data come as clean as possible. So we've done a lot of innovation in developing technology to scale up and process this data. And we have an analytics engine that when we have the data, we can analyze the data in particular ways. And there's a whole side of team that is devoted to analytics. And then hopefully from these analytics, we get some insights on what's happening with wildlife at different levels. And what we want to do as a conservation organization is translate that information to policymakers so they can take some action around what's happening. Here's some kind of cool pictures of animals from team. From basically, I can read them from the left up. That's a margay. Then it's a bush dog, which is a very, very rare species of dog that lives in the Amazon. They travel in packs. They look like a little dog. You know, they're actually dogs, but they're very strange. There's an anteater, kind of a giant anteater. There's a paca, which is essentially a big mouse, and which is hunted for food. A lot. It has a really good meat. There's a tapir, which is a cousin of the elephants, kind of the elephant equivalent of in South America. And there we have a little, I think that's a deer. Yeah, it's a deer. It's a red-tailed deer, I think, from Ecuador. So we have a lot of animals that we capture in these images, and the question is, how do we use this information to really understand, to better conserve the forest and get an understanding of forest health? So, you know, team is really behind this question of we have a global problem. You know, conservation problems are local, but some of them are local, but now we have global problems as well. And everybody's affected by the environment. So team is a response to that. We need to the global problem of how wildlife is changing and how do we conserve it better, we need global solutions like team. We've had a lot of experience working on this network, basically 14 years, advancing innovation, building this network, and showing that it works. And I want to share with you some of the science insights and later some of our conservation insights on team. So basically, I don't want to share a lot of the details, but you know, with all these data, we were able to do the first global assessment of tropical forests in protected areas. So there was a big controversy a few years ago of a paper that was published in Science talking about 50% of protected areas in tropical forests are not effective. And a lot of that work was based on expert opinion. What I mean by that is the people that were doing the paper went to these protected areas and talked to the personnel working there and asked them questions like, do you think wildlife is being effectively protected? Or do you think wildlife is declining? And many of them don't have any data on that, and they did respond, most of the cases, negatively. So we had a big problem with that result, because even though we care about wildlife and we agree that, you know, that could be a problem, we are a science-based organization. So we want to have the best science available to us in order to answer the questions, rather than asking people around, because they might have different motivations. You know, in general, people are not as reliable. So we did this assessment with the team data and look at whether we can find any evidence for declines in protected areas. And we didn't find anything, which is very interesting and has now generated controversy around the role of protected areas and whether protected areas are working. And we're saying, yes, protected areas seem to be working. And this is a positive result for conservation. And we still need more work, because we only looked at 17 protected areas. If we could look at 200, that would be great. So this is the value of team, is not only showing these results now, but the potential of these results if we scale up globally. Now, the other very interesting thing was what happens to wildlife when wildlife disappears from a forest? What happens to the forest? A lot of my friends ask me, why do you care so much about wildlife? I mean, they're great and everything, but you know, they're just like fuzzy animals. Who cares? And you know, if you have children, I don't have children, but if you have children, you know the answer. Children love animals. But more seriously, if we don't if we don't have wildlife, we actually lose something. And this study was made by somebody who was not associated with CI, just used the data. One of the nice things about TEAM is that the data is publicly available, so anybody can download it and use it. And what they did with the data is they looked at what would happen if you did the thought experiment of removing wildlife. What would that mean to the forest? So if you remove wildlife that disperses trees, seeds from trees, then you would remove all these trees, right? And so if you do that, what would happen to the carbon storage capacity of the forests? And what they found was amazing, that the amount of carbon on average goes down by 4% in a forest. Now, it varies between 1% and 11%, depending on how many species dispersed by animals there are. But if you think about 4% and you don't think that's a lot, well, guess how much of the carbon was lost in the Amazon between 2000 and 2010? 4%. Deforestation was about 4% in the Amazon in those 10 years. So this is deforestation without losing a single tree. If you lose wildlife, you lose carbon storage capacity in the forest. Basically, you're losing forest. So that was the second really interesting insight. The third one was about the effects of climate change on tropical animals. And there's a lot of work on climate change and how it has affected species like frogs or salamanders or insects that depend a lot on the temperature. So they don't have the ability to regulate their own temperature, so they move according to where the temperature is moving, their preferred temperature is moving. But with mammals like us, where we have the ability to thermoregulate, so we maintain a constant temperature, it's much less clear what happens under climate change. And what this study showed was that right now we can see with the team data that animals are moving along elevational gradients. Mammals and birds both are moving along elevational gradients, in a consistent pattern in some places, showing that climate change is having an effect on these species right now, not in the future, not in 20 years. Right now, you're seeing distributions shifting, even with mammals who can thermoregulate. So the changes in temperature are having an effect on the ability of mammals to operate in an optimal way, and that's why they're moving, to find cooler places. In some cases, they come down, depending on the particular animal and what they do. So those are the insights, some kind of cool insights from science. The other thing is that this science is great and everything, but if we don't put it to action, then it's not very useful. And as a conservation organization, we want to make sure that the science we produce contributes to our mission and helps advance our mission. So we have taken, these are a couple of our policy impacts in terms of what we've accomplished in the last few years. But using the team data, protected area authorities in 5 of the countries where we work have taken management actions in response to the data. In one case, for example, in the golden cat in Africa, they were able to, they saw that the golden cat was declining, and they realized, analyzing the data, that it was because of tourists around the protected area these tourist routes were built for gorillas. And then the cat was basically absent from those areas. And this is a very small reserve. So in order to make sure that they had, the cat population was present, they moved actually the gorilla routes and put them closer to the camp and closer to other places where there's still gorillas, but there's no cats. The lowland paca is another example from our site in Costa Rica. That was a species, one of the species that I showed in the pictures, that looks like a mouse, like a big mouse. Those are hunted for food, and we showed consistent declines of paca in Costa Rica. And we showed this data to the park authorities, and when they saw that, they didn't know. First of all, they didn't know. And then they said, well, we're going to double our patrolling efforts for hunters. They have patrols to go out, find hunters, find snares, things like that. And they did that, and after they did that, they showed a recovery of the population. So these are a couple of examples where the data from team has had impact at the local level. Now, the other thing that we've been able to do is to, through the work with team, we have been able to demonstrate that this is a proof of concept that works really well. And one thing is that we want to do in the future, and we have demonstrated this in Brazil now, is how do we scale up to the whole level of a protected area network in a country? So now we convinced the Ministry of the Environment of Brazil to deploy team camera trapping in their protected area network in the Amazon. And we're talking about 20 to 25 protected areas. We started with 6 as a pilot, but the goal is to ramp up to 25, hopefully all of them. And then governments have a tool to measure how protected areas are working in terms of biodiversity. There's a lot of measurements of protected area effectiveness that deal with, a lot of operative things, like how many people work there, how many cars they have, what's their budget, but very little in terms of how are the animals doing. So this is a way to get at that and measure that. So I feel really excited about this program, but we're just, team is not done. Team is looking at the future and looking at new possibilities. And some of the things that I want to share with you today, pointing to a direction where we want to have more influence, we want to use more sensors, we want to try to expand the number of species that we monitor. So in general, we want to expand our approach. And how are we going to do that? We have a two-pronged approach. First, we want to scale up. So we want to use the team network to offer it to new partners, to new users. There's a lot of camera trapping going on in the world right now, and those people are not getting the information into conservation. So how do we take advantage of that opportunity and create more opportunities for regular camera trappers? We're also talking with commodity companies about the value of certain commodity practices like coffee, shade coffee, and how that influences biodiversity. So team is a way to measure the effectiveness of those practices, for example. And then the other part is innovating. So this is a huge problem. Camera trap data is heavy data, it's a lot of information, and it's difficult to process and manage. So how can we use technology to make that better? How can we use artificial intelligence, for example, to identify animals in a picture? Right now, people in the team network have to sit down in a computer and identify picture by picture. That takes a long time. So how do we speed up that process? How do we create new analytics that show where animals are at a given time, or how many animals are present in the protected area at any given time? How do we scale up and introduce new sensors, like acoustic sensors and other kinds of sensors? Maybe create a new sensor that doesn't exist, that has all these sorts of observing systems that we care about in one place. So that's where we're going with team in this innovation approach. Here's some ideas about, this is a kind of an evolving vision of the next version of team, which might have a completely different name, we don't know yet. But we want to rally around certain kinds of partners, which are this multicolor circle. We need partners in technology, we need partners that are expert in policy and science and education. But we also want to target these clients, basically governments, protected areas, companies that are having an impact in the environment, like extractives, so they can better measure their impact and adjust. Indigenous communities are also a big group of people that have been shown to be very effective at managing their areas, but again, there's very little data on how that goes, so team would have a very good role in this. And the camera trapping community is another big client that we're trying to target here. So I love this slide, basically because of the chimps moving around. But we have this campaign at CI, Nature Speaking, but unless we listen to what nature is telling us, we can't really help nature, and we can't really help ourselves. That's the whole point. So we're listening. There's a lot of other programs in CI that are listening. We're listening to wildlife in particular. We're listening to these chimps, to all the species that we monitor. And I think this is really exciting. And I hope that you enjoy the presentation. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jorge. I do have a couple questions here that have been sent to me. Um, you talked a lot about how Team is a global solution and how, one of the next steps is going to be scaling up. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? I mean, how does this get scaled globally?
That's a really good question. I think there's a combination of things. One is we really need to take advantages of communities of practice that are out there doing camera trapping. That's something that we're thinking about. We also need to strengthen our work with governments. So once we start working with one government and we show that it works, then it's much easier to demonstrate the value of this approach to other governments. And in theory, what we want is that every single government that has wildlife or has a wildlife problem uses camera trapping to manage their wildlife. We also think about getting outside of the forest. We now work in mixed landscapes where we have forests or natural habitat. We also have other kinds of land use, in particular agriculture, because people need food. But how do these landscapes look for wildlife? And are there better ways to design landscapes so they're more friendly for nature than others? And that's why some of our work with coffee, we're going to start some work with coffee looking at that in terms of how does a landscape with shade coffee look for biodiversity compared to a landscape with sun coffee? And so those are basically kind of the three peers that we're looking for scaling up.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. Another question that I have is, I guess we talked a lot about, how we use this data, this information to sort of inform, our conservation programs, what our focus is. Do you have any more examples of sort of on the ground change that has come about from team data?
So yeah, there's a few around. We have, for example, in the management of endangered species, we have a couple of examples with the African golden cat, which was a previously undetected species in this particular protected area in Uganda. And then they showed that it was declining, which was not very encouraging. And they thought about why is it declining, and it turned out to be related to the use of the park. So the park itself was being responsible in some way for this change. And as soon as they realized that, they changed their approach to their tourist routes, and that immediately solved the problem. And so that's one example. We've also had some of the work in Peru showing that the decline of one species is associated with the increase of another species. So this was a pig that was is not very common, but it has been increasing over the years in Peru. And this species they travel in big groups, and they were associated with a decline in a bird that is endangered. So this site in Peru was able to demonstrate this relationship that has not been shown before because nobody had long-term data on any of these two species, right? So those are some of the benefits of doing that.
Fantastic. It's always been amazing to me with team. I mean, about how, this is happening all over the world. I mean, this network is huge, and as you showed, that just the sheer number of images you're seeing every month is amazing. So I can imagine going through all those. You see some pretty interesting things. So one sort of fun question I personally actually have is what's sort of the most unusual or interesting thing that you've captured on a camera trap image?
So I get asked this question a lot. I'm not surprised, but I think the most interesting thing that I've ever seen in a camera trap is this animal called the flat-headed cat. Flat-headed cat lives in Malaysia. It's endemic to some areas of Asia. I think it's endemic to Malaysia. I might be wrong. Very rare, very difficult to find. A lot of people that have studied cats, a lot of trouble finding it. We found it a couple times, and this cat has a flat head. It's like a regular cat, regular domestic cat, maybe a little bigger, but it has a completely flat head. You could put like a glass of water on the top of that head and it would not move. The reason it has a flat head is because it fishes. It's specialized in fishing. And so the head kind of goes into the water like very quickly, and then it can grab whatever it's trying to get. It also makes it a little bit more aerodynamic or hydrodynamic in this case. So I've never seen that animal in my life, and partly because I don't have a lot of experience working in Asia. But I was amazed by that picture.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Well, what about? I mean, you know, so obviously we capture a lot of you know, a lot of different types of species. We capture a lot of different types of species. Do we have we ever seen any like poachers or any human activity that has raised flags for us?
Yeah, we have. Unfortunately, we have, and this is not new to people that work in protected areas. In some places, we see pictures of poachers, and it's clear that they are poachers because of what they're carrying or what they're doing. I don't think we've done any analysis yet on how this changes, basically because there's very, very few pictures, not a lot. But there are pictures of poachers, and a system like TEAM coupled with an early warning system would be a really good way to attack poaching. Right now, the TEAM sampling doesn't happen all year long in a place. It only happens during the dry season when it's easier to do the field work and set up the camera traps and get more animals. But so we can't really attack the problem of poaching with the TEAM data. But in the future, you could put up camera traps to monitor this in particular, and it would be very useful. Yeah.
Sure. Interesting. Well, excellent. Yeah, if we have any other questions, we can certainly address them. Feel free to send them to me directly via email, or if you have them in the chat yet, we can follow up with you. But I want to first thank Jorge for giving us this overview of the TEAM network. It's just one of the many very interesting and exciting projects that we have here at Conservation International. So thank you all for connecting and hearing a little bit about it. Of course, if you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect you with Jorge if you have questions about TEAM, or if you have questions about any of the other work that Conservation International is doing and that you as donors are supporting. I'm more than happy to help. Also, keep an eye on your inbox. Again, this session today was recorded, and we'll be sending you that recording. Feel free to share it with your friends, and watch it over and over again if you like. I mean, we always keep learning. We'll be back again in July with a presentation from Lisa Famolari. Lisa is the Vice President of CI's Amazonia work. She's going to be talking about CI's work in South America, in the Amazonia region, a place where our work on many different aspects of conservation sort of comes together, mitigating climate change, sustainable livelihoods, and green development. It sort of all comes together. So that should be a really exciting talk, and you'll see an invitation with information about that very soon. But again, thank you so much for connecting, and thank you, Jorge, for taking time out of your day to speak to us and telling